Hey, welcome everybody to the Dr. Jeff Experience. We are glad to have you this day. This truly is a great day, a brand new year. What are we, January 2nd? Second day into the month of January, year 2024. And we are back for impactful edutainment. Edutainment. You heard me right. I didn't make a mistake. Edutainment, education and entertainment. Listen, we want you to sit back, put your seatbelts on because we've got some impactful commentary tonight. Um, we've got some we've got a subject tonight that's going to blow your mind and hopefully add something to you. One of my cohorts from the doctoral program at Howard University, the Howard University School of Divinity, Dr. Gigi Khanyezi is with us. Let me just go on and bring her in right now. Dr. Khanyezi, how are you?
What up, Dr. Jeff? It is so good to be with you and your listeners.
It is so good to be with you. And let me tell you something. It is a pleasure. I'm excited for what enlightenment you're going to bring to this audience. And from the outset, let me just say this. This is a great time for what we're talking about. And I want to say that when we're talking about healing racial trauma, we're not talking anti anything. What we're dealing with is trying to get to the bottom of what has taken place so that we can heal. Many of us, whether we realize it or not, are suffering from what I know of something called post-traumatic slave syndrome. And really, when you think about it, we think of how blacks and people of color are suffering from that, but other races are also. Because as you and I both know through epigenetic study, if in fact we don't change our environment, the way we talk about certain subjects, the way we do talk about certain subjects, and how we respond to various things that are happening politically and even societal wise, things will remain the same, and we will never heal from the atrocities that have taken place over the years. So, Dr. Khanyezi, introduce yourself and tell us who you are. Tell us a little about you.
What is up, my people? Dr. Jeff and Dr. G coming at you.
That's it.
HU, you know. So we became doctors together.
Yeah.
We went through the journey together. Family, it is such a treat to be with you. This is really my life's work, the healing of racial trauma, and how it intersects with faith as well. It's not limited. My work isn't limited to faith-based, but it includes faith-based. And then it intersects with beloved community. How do we cultivate beloved community? Because we'll get to this in more detail in a minute, but beloved community is the key to healing racial trauma. I'm going to explain to you why in a minute. To answer your question, Dr. Jeff, about who I am and what I do. Well, first and foremost, I am a mama to two beautifully, richly melanated boys from the motherland. I spent 10 years in Soweto, South Africa, and had the great joy of and honor of fostering and adopting them while I was there. We have been 6 years back in the U.S. Their names are Jericho and Judah. And that is the most important thing you probably know about me, is that I'm their mom. Secondly, I grew up in East Oakland. So that has been really key in forming who I became as an adult. So I grew up in the era right after the Black Panther Party was really influential. So grew up very much in the very capable, amazing shadow of their work in the community. In terms of what I do, so I founded an organization called Jesus and Justice. And again, my work is not limited to faith-based, but this particular part of my work is. So Jesus and Justice is a community, first and foremost, before anything else. We're a community where we really cultivate authentic relationships, because that is how we know from both science and scripture, that is how we heal and how we transform, is in relationships. But the one caveat is we don't heal in relationships if we don't feel safe in them.
Wow.
And that right there is a big part of, and this is science. This is not just my opinion. This is what science tells us. It's about neurochemistry and
hey, wait a minute. Whoa. You can't just do a drive-by like that. Let's go back to that. Say that again. You can't heal?
Yeah, you cannot heal. So we know from science that we heal in relationships. Our bodies are built to be an intimate relationship. Not having intimate connections, that by itself is traumatic. So we were built to be in relationship. We know from science for certain that we heal in relationship. We change, we transform best in relationship. The caveat is we will not heal in relationships where we don't feel safe.
Wow.
Period.
That's big. That's big. That is big. We can't heal. Say that one more time. I'm so sorry. That's so huge. I want people to get this.
Yeah, it's important to chew and digest. We will not heal in relationships where we don't feel safe.
Wow. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and the key is feeling safe. Not necessarily being safe, but feeling safe. So let's look at it from a racial trauma perspective. So when we're talking about, especially, this parts of this are true for people of color in general, but it is intensely, profoundly true for the Black American community and the Indigenous community of North America. And the reason I name those two in particular is because those are the only two groups in the United States that have been intergenerationally enslaved. So what we know from science is that perhaps the number one factor in early childhood that determines our well-being into adolescence and adulthood, and that means physical well-being, physical health, mental health, relational health, spiritual health, every part of our lives. Probably the number one factor, determining factor, is our ability to attach. And when I say attach, what I mean is our ability to connect with another human and build a relationship that is based on trust, like authentic, trusting connection. What science has taught us for several decades now, is that attachment, the ability to attach, is the majority of it is formed by the time we're 18 months old.
Wow.
The majority of our ability to attach in a healthy way is formed by the time we're 18 months old. So now let's look at the lens, through the lens of racial trauma in those communities, those two. So when you think about babies being forcibly removed from mothers, whether that be because the mom got sold on the auction block, whether that be because the mom was murdered, whether that be because the baby or the small child was sold on the auction block or was taken into the master's house, quote unquote, master's house, the enslaver's house. Those are all forms of attachment trauma, profound attachment trauma. And we're not just talking about one generation. We're talking about generation after generation after generation. And this includes kids being forcibly removed from families and sent to boarding schools. There is a reason why in the clinical world, we call a child's loss of their birth mother, we call it the primal wound. Because of its impact, how profound its impact is on us as we grow up into adulthood. We're talking about multiple generations of children and families who experience the primal wound, which is profound attachment trauma. So what does that mean exactly? That means that one of the things that is intensely prevalent and pervasive in our communities of color, and especially Indigenous and Black, is that the very thing that we need most to heal, which is intimate connection, is the thing that we're most afraid of.
Wow.
The thing that we need the most to heal, because remember, science has taught us we heal in relationships. It has to do with our neurobiology, our brains, our neurochemistry, and our nervous system. We heal in relationships. So the one thing that we need the most to heal, we're afraid of the most.
The one thing that we need to heal the most is that thing that we're afraid of the most.
Yes, that's right.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
what. And the ways that it shows up in our communities, it is, I mean, you talk about domestic violence, both the perpetrator as well as the victim. You talk about physical diseases that are directly related to lack of intimate connection. When I say intimate, I'm not talking about sexual. I'm not even talking about romantic. I'm
Right.
talking about relationship, quality relationship, where we feel seen, we feel understood, we feel accepted, and we trust. It's a connection based on trust. That is attachment.
Wow.
And that is
So
what I'm most terrified of.
I told you guys, you better buckle up, man. We got some heavy lifting going on here, man. I'm so glad that you are digging in on this. But let's go back a little bit. What exactly is racial trauma?
Yeah, that's a big question. So basically, the simple way to understand trauma, if we take out the race part for a second, let's break it down. The simple way to understand trauma is anything that pushes your physiological system into overwhelm. That is trauma. So something that deeply traumatizes one person will not necessarily deeply traumatize another. There are variations in how we're built, and then you have events, that will traumatize anyone who experiences them, like physical abuse, sexual assault, those kinds of things. But trauma is anything that overwhelms your system as it tries to deal with it. And when your system goes into overwhelm, that's called a trauma response. And there is a whole cascade of biochemical reactions that happen in your brain and in your body. So
Wow.
your cortisol shoots up. Cortisol and adrenaline are two of the stress chemicals. And God designed our bodies to respond like that so that we can meet the stressor, so that we can run or we can fight, whatever we need to do to save our lives or save the life of our loved ones. Cortisol shoots up and adrenaline shoots up. But here's how the body works, though. When cortisol and adrenaline shoot up, then the pleasure chemicals, they go down. When I say pleasure chemicals, I'm not specifically referring to like physical pleasure. I'm speaking of the chemicals, the neurotransmitters that we understand are key antidepressants. So like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, oxytocin. When cortisol goes up, those chemicals go down. So now let's bring in the racial aspect, right? So that's trauma. And our bodies are designed to meet the stressor in that moment. If we need to lift a car off of our child, we need to run from a bear, right? But our bodies were not designed to run from a bear for 25 years straight. Our bodies were not designed to lift a car off of a body 6 times a day for 35 years.
Got it.
But that's what we're having to do as people of color. We're living in a chronic state of trauma. So what does that tell you about our neurobiology? It means our cortisol is constantly elevated, which our bodies were not designed for. So that creates disease, first of all. Second of all, if cortisol is chronically elevated, then the pleasure chemicals are chronically decreased, which means we are at a much higher risk for depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, and all the things that come along with that, like patterns of broken relationships, all the things that come with post-trauma. What we have as people of color is actually complex trauma because it's repeated incidents of trauma every day for our whole lives.
So here's a question from one of our viewers. So are you saying some may be born that way?
Now that's a great question. This is where the intergenerational piece comes in. So what we know for a fact is that trauma, when we experience trauma, our DNA changes. The structure of it doesn't change. The structure stays the same, but your DNA's ability to express itself the way it was designed, that changes. And that change in the DNA is passed down through every generation until someone does the healing work. And once someone in the family line does the healing work, guess what? It disrupts the transmission and it's no longer passed down. We know for a fact from science that it can be transmitted at least 14 generations. Now, if you do the math, because I did the math, if you do the math, That takes us back before the transatlantic trade of enslaved bodies.
So Dr. Khanyezi, let me jump in here. So what you're saying is something that I explained to so many people. You know, many of us in the faith realm, we talk about pulling down strongholds and breaking generational curses. And I tell people, you know, yes, spiritually we can do that, but physically we can do that too. And I will continue to bring this up through epigenetic study based on environment. The epi that is above the gene communicates to that gene what is good, what is bad, basically, and it responds accordingly. So, if in fact I'm in a household that continues to be violent, volatile, traumatic, to the point where I talk about white people, black people, Chinese people, Latino people, whoever, gay, LGBT, whatever it is, those under me and around me are going to share in their disdain for those groups of people because that's what they hear over and over and over again. And that's a trauma. It's traumatic. Am I right?
100%. 100%. And what you're naming is a really key part of understanding what it means to heal racial trauma, because we talked a few minutes ago about attachment trauma, right? If we want to create relationships and spaces that heal trauma in general, and especially racial trauma, the key, if I had to boil it down to one primary thing, the key is creating an ethos or a culture that centers relationships. It centers building trust. Wow. More than anything else. There's a particular modality called trust-based relational intervention. That is what I'm talking about. We disrupt the patterns of trauma and racial trauma, and we heal our neurobiology and our neural pathways by creating trust, because that is how our neurobiology comes back into regulation. That's attachment. That's how relationships are formed. But what we tend to do is we perpetuate the same traumas over and over and over, because we end up creating communities and spaces where we embrace certain parts of a person, but not all of them. Not all of them. We'll just embrace parts of you. So you can only show up in this space as this, or this if you want to belong. There's a whole field called science of belonging. Wow. And this is part of the key. You can only belong if we're only going to treat you like you belong if you show up as this or this or this. But if you show up as queer, if you show up as trans, if you show up as a woman who actually wants to serve according to her gifts and not her genitalia, yeah, I did just say that. Those are not acceptable. So we're not going to treat you like you belong, and we're not going to treat you as one of us, which means that's judgment. We will not heal in a space that we don't feel safe. And if it's rife with judgment, that is deepening wounds. It is not healing them.
Wow, guys, listen, I hope you're getting this and you got a notepad, because you need to be writing some of this stuff down. Listen, if you're watching us live on Facebook and if you've got any comments or questions, go ahead and chime in. YouTube, Instagram Live, we're monitoring all of those comments. So go ahead and ask your questions. If you got any comments, we're going to go further in this. Dr. Khanyezi, I did some research in this, and I was amazed to see it's almost like the 7 stages of grief, the amount of traumas that were listed that I found. We've got interpersonal racism. We have systemic racism. We have public space racism. We've got something called spatial racism, SPATIAL racism, which basically is similar to redlining or putting certain areas for ethnic groups. We've got environmental racism, and we all know what that is. Plants, runoff from extremely dangerous chemicals in certain areas. white privilege. And then there's the defensive othering. This was interesting. The defensive othering, which is the exceptional Negro, or the model minority that thinks that they're better than everyone else, or I'm not like the other.
Yeah.
And really, that is a real sign of trauma itself. Am I right?
Yeah, and that's a real sign of internalizing the hierarchy. We've internalized it, and it's all about a state of trauma puts our bodies and our brains in a state where our highest priority is survival. Wow. That's the way we're wired, is our highest priority of our brain is survive. It's self-preservation. So if we're not doing our healing work, some of us, trauma will cause us to find ways to bump ourselves up on the hierarchy, even if it means stepping on someone to put someone else below us. That is classic symptom of internalized racism.
Dr. Khanyezi, let me ask you a question. Where do you see the most significant areas of racial trauma basically being observed? I mean, or being generated? I'm not using the correct word. Where do you see it being displayed?
Do you mean like how it shows up in our lives as trauma, or do you mean where we're suffering the greatest wounds?
I guess where say the first part again.
Do you mean in what ways the trauma is showing up in our lives as people?
Yeah, that part.
Well, I would say at the root of it, and then from this root, a lot of the symptoms kind of splay out from there. So what we have to understand about racial trauma as a particular aspect of trauma is that we live in a hierarchy that sends the message over and over and over and over. The more melanated you are, the less human you are. Mm. So that's the message that we're bombarded with over and over and over, not just since we're born, from the time we're conceived, because we experience it in the womb. We experience it in the womb. Speaking of which, I'm going to drop this. I'm going to drop this. And then
tell people it's a bomb coming.
We can come back to it if you want to, but
sure.
Once a mother is 5 months pregnant with a baby, you have 3 generations inside one biological space. 3 generations. I'm going to tell you why. Because when the baby in the womb is 5 months gestation, the cells that will become the ovaries or the cells that will become the sperm have already appeared in the baby. So that means that not only your child is in your womb, but your grandchildren are in your womb as well. And remember, I talked about the biochemical surge that happens when we experience a trauma response and when we live in a chronic state of trauma. That conditions the bodies of the baby in your womb and the babies they will eventually have. It conditions them, and this is a response to the earlier question about, are we born like this? It conditions the body to literally be born with higher than average cortisol and lower than average antidepressant chemicals.
And this is caused by
trauma. So anything that overwhelms the system. And when you're talking about Black and brown communities and other communities, this is chronic state of living. This is our chronic state of being. So one of the single most important ways that we start, the place that you start to heal, is you learn how to regulate your nervous system. Because when you learn how to regulate your nervous system, you are actually regulating, wait for it, your neurochemicals, which means your cortisol goes down, your adrenaline goes down, and the antidepressant chemicals go up. Wow. When I say regulate, what I mean is you learn skills, literally very practical, very simple skills. First, you have to learn to recognize the signs that my body is now in a stress response, or maybe my body is always in a stress response, and you just make it a part of your routine to do very basic skills. Like there's breathing exercises, there's all kinds of different ways to ground yourself. If you want, before the end of this call, I can give you a few of those really simple skills. Just let me know. But when you start using those in daily practices and in moment-to-moment interventions for when you recognize I'm having a stress response, then what you're doing is you're taking over your neurobiology to bring it out of trauma and into what we call rest and repair.
So I'm laughing because one of our first episodes, we talked about self-care, and we talked about the importance of breathing. And a friend of mine who's a therapist, he talked about square breathing.
Yes.
And the importance of it. And we talked about the importance of and just this morning, I was listening to a show, and they were talking about ways that we can go into this new year being better. And again, one of them was finding time to breathe and get back into the rhythm that we need to be in to take away the stress and the trauma of the day itself.
That's right. That's exactly right. And what that's doing is it's regulating your nervous system again. We have something called a vagus nerve. And that vagus nerve connects our brain and our neurochemicals with the whole rest of our body.
The vagus nerve.
Vagus nerve, yeah. And so when you do breathing exercises, especially when it includes deep breathing, it engages and regulates the vagus nerve, which then in turn regulates the nervous system. So something as simple as breathing exercises, I'm not exaggerating when I say to you, they are life-saving. When we are dying from heart disease, heart attacks, stroke, diabetes, these are all directly connected to living in chronic, extraordinary amounts of stress.
Come on, talk, Dr. Gigi, talk. It is so important. You know, guys, I got a lot of friends that, think, oh, man, you're getting weird now. No, I'm not getting weird. I'm getting real, man. I'm trying to save your life.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
many times people want to say, especially in the ecclesiastical world, the religious world, the spiritual world, we want to talk about, I'm going to pray for you, or just go home and pray about it. Take it to Jesus. Well, yes. And while you're taking it to Jesus, pray. Breathe.
Yes.
Find some place that you can hear God talk to you. I often talk about, praying is not just talking to God, but it's listening to God also.
Yeah.
And those places, find a space in your home or wherever you are. This person this morning was talking about a workplace. She literally goes to the supply room throughout the day and takes 5 minutes and just resets. Takes time to listen. I talk about how I sit underneath a tree because I've got bird feeders around there, and I watch the birds and I hear the tunes of the birds. I hear the wind rustling through the leaves when there are leaves on the trees. But just feeling the breeze, that's therapeutic for me.
Yeah. And
Turn off the news. Turn off the news. There's some weeks where I limit, because I'm a news freak. I love to know what's going on in the world because we have platforms like this, so we want to be informed. But this can be traumatic also, and especially in the racial trauma zone, because a lot of what we're hearing seems to be an onslaught of us against them.
That's right.
Immigrants against supposedly Americans, and this is our world, and this is our nation, and we don't want them to come over here to our place, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And it's very important, and I want to bring this out. It's very important for us to start reading and start listening to. There was I forget what show it was. They were talking to a bunch of millennials and lower. So they were asking them about where you got your news from. And most of them said, from the internet or from social media. And they showed some of the social media clips and they asked them about it. How do you think this is true? Do you think it's false? And they fact checked most of them and it was all false.
Yeah.
And this group of young people believed it to be true and they were shocked to see the fake news that it was. And this again leads us to a traumatic situation that continues that traumatic response within our families.
Yeah.
So speak to that if you would.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. You mentioned something early on, when you said, go pray and breathe.
Yeah.
I want to speak to that for a minute because in modern day Western societies, we have really, and this comes straight from Eurocentric thought, that we separate. Spirituality is one thing, the body is something else, relationships is something else. It's all separated, right? And we've got to focus just on God. But we have to take into account the community in which our sacred scriptures were written. That's the ancient world. And the cultures in the ancient world from which these sacred texts that are the Bible came from is a world that is deeply integrated. It is deeply holistic. There was the understanding of the human and the world is not so fragmented. So your spiritual well-being is deeply tied into your physical well-being. They're not two separate things. And so when we talk about, the right intervention is to pray and not to breathe, or the right intervention, that's actually in direct contrast to what Scripture tells us. Because we're reading Scripture through the lens of modern day white supremacist, patriarchal, postmodern society, instead of through the ancient Hebrew and ancient Jewish eyes from which it was written, right? So when we talk about breathing, here's the thing. We know for a fact that the Holy Spirit lives in us. The Holy Spirit lives in us. If we are living in chronic stress and trauma, we can't connect to that.
Yeah.
Everything is so loud internally and our chemicals are bouncing all over the place. We can't be still long enough to actually connect to the Spirit of God that lives in us. That's part of what breathing does. It allows you to connect again.
Yeah. Look at this, Dr. Gigi. I've experienced the benefits of managing my pain from a prostatectomy, from breathing and praying. Just what we said.
That's right. Something else that's really interesting, and this goes back to, thank you for that comment, by the way, that whoever wrote that was really, really helpful. When I spoke earlier about how significant relationships and belonging are, here's what we know from multiple studies. The same places in our brain that we experience physical pain are the same places that we feel the pain of feeling like we don't belong.
Wow.
So physical pain and feeling like we don't belong, or being made to feel like we don't belong, they activate the same place in our brain.
Wow.
So what we know is, in the same way that our bodies, when they get thirsty, are driven to find drink to alleviate that thirst. In the same way, when we feel like we don't belong, we're not understood, we're not embraced, it's with the same veracity that we try to find a place where we belong. And that right there is a key in understanding gang activity. It's a key in understanding the street life, in understanding substance abuse, because we're self-medicating the pain of not belonging and of untreated trauma.
So I've been studying something, this Ayurvedic healing and Ayurvedic medicines, and it is an amazing, I'm just almost totally against Western medicines. Looking at natural and homeopathic healing, it's something that we really need to start reading about
Yeah.
I can't stress the importance of reading. To get underneath, this is what we did in research. Get underneath the text, get underneath of what's being said, and continue to dig until you find the root of what's being talked about. The truth is out there. You just got to search for it. It starts with a yearning to be better.
Yeah.
And you're talking about racial healing and the racial trauma. I'm sorry, traumatic healing, racial traumatic healing. Tell me the exact term.
Yeah. Healing racial trauma.
Healing racial trauma. And I guess one of the first things that you do is you got to get to the root of it. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the goal.
And how do you do that? How do you go about that?
Ooh, that is such a juicy question. Thank you.
Some people in denial. I mean, some people in denial.
Yeah. Yeah. So this, my answer might fly in the face of some assumptions that we have in many faith communities. All right. So I don't want to sound like there's only one thing. So it's a multifaceted approach. That's what we want to have, a multifaceted approach. So if I could say the two foundational things, number one is what I've already said. That is relationships that are safe, where you don't feel judged and you're embraced for all of who you are. That's number one. Number two, we have to reconnect with our bodies.
Wow.
We have to reconnect with our bodies.
Okay, stay there. Talk about that.
Yeah. So when we talk about racial trauma, we can't talk about racial trauma without also talking about the intergenerational aspect, which we've already talked about, right? But here's what else we know about the intergenerational piece is that when you're talking about, for example, a woman who is being sexually assaulted over and over and over because she's enslaved, and it's legal and there's no protection for her. Her body's natural response, because God designed it this way, is to either fight the perpetrator or to flee. However, she knows if she does either one of those, she may be killed. At the very least, she'll probably be tortured. Her children might be killed or tortured, her partner. And so therefore, what she does in order to survive is to disconnect from her body. In order to survive, she disconnects from her body. In other words, she silences the voice of her body. God designed our bodies so that they are always speaking. They're always speaking. And we've been programmed, for the sake of survival, we've been programmed to ignore it, to stuff it, because we won't survive. Back then, we wouldn't survive if we didn't, and sometimes even today. So therefore, we don't listen to the cues. And this is really important in understanding a lot of aspects of where our communities are suffering. For example, again, domestic violence. So a lot of women who are survivors of domestic violence will tell you on the other side, when they are free and healing, they will tell you that at some point when things appeared really good in the relationship, they had a feeling, or they had even if it was just momentary, something's not quite right here. But they learned to silence their bodies in order to survive. So what did they do? They ignored it. And for many people, it's not even a conscious ignoring, it's subconscious. And they don't realize it until after they're out and free, years later, sometimes decades later. So we have disconnected from our bodies. And the primary way that our bodies let us know where trauma is sitting and how it's impacting our lives is through our bodies.
Wow. So would you say that this could be one of the root causes for high blood pressure?
Oh,
and
100%.
Substance diseases are prominent in the African American and minority community?
Let me tell you a story to answer your question. Let me tell you a story. This just happened. Last week, I was talking to just a beautiful inside and out Black woman clinical psychologist in her early 60s. And she's had a heart murmur since she was an infant. And now at early 60s, the heart challenges have gotten so significant that they can become life-threatening. And it forced an early retirement for her because they're that significant. So one of the things her doctor did a few weeks ago was ordered her to wear a heart monitor for 14 days so that they can track the incidents. And what she found was last week, before I met with her, she counted almost 100 cardiac events. So that just means a symptom related to your heart. Almost 100 in less than 48 hours.
Wow.
Almost 100. So when we talked, I walked her through an exercise to literally reconnect with her heart. And when I talked to her 2 days later, she had hardly had any since she did the exercise.
From 100 cardiac incidents in 48 hours until zero.
Not zero, but close to zero.
Once you started talking about this.
Once she engaged the principles that I gave her about reconnecting to the body in general, and specifically reconnecting to the heart, because it's a symptom. Her heart is literally talking to her by having a heart murmur, by having palpitations, by all these different symptoms that we have.
It's saying, change me, change. I need change.
It's saying, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And then when you pay attention, it will tell you what is going on if you ask it.
Wow.
I know for some people in the church space, this is going to sound crazy, but I promise you, this is the work that I do every day. And I watch people's lives radically transform many times in a very short space of time, because they've never been introduced to the idea that all these symptoms, my body is actually talking to me.
So let me say this, and I'm okay with saying this. Okay, I'm all right with saying this. One of the issues in our church realm is that I'm not going to say we don't, some of us don't go beyond. I know that I am connected to a church with a group of men that meet every Saturday morning, and we talk about these type of topics. So what we do is we go beyond just, we're going to pray for you. I want you to go and pray about this, and everything's going to happen from then. No, we're going to teach you how to do the work.
Yes.
While you pray. What we're going to do, we read a book from Kirk Byron Jones. God, I can't remember the name of it. I got it here. Brother Ben, help me out, man. Anyway, it was about slowing down. It was right at the start of the pandemic. And it talked about getting in the back of the boat. It talked about slowing down. It talked about breathing. It talked about healing through meditation. And through all of those, it was reconnecting with God.
Yeah.
And you can see what we were just talking about, your blood pressure becoming better. You can see the importance of eating right, exercising in moderation. We're not talking about going to the gym, lifting 400 pounds with 20 reps a piece, anything like that. We're talking about just getting out and walking.
Yeah.
And while you're walking, you're breathing. And again, what I call white noise. Rest in the storm or addicted to hurry. Thank you, Reverend Ben. He's one of the members of that men's group. The books are called Rest in the Storm or Addicted to Hurry by Kirk Byron Jones. And he's a pastor. And he taught us about those ways of becoming one with God and nature, which is God. So I have incorporated peacetime throughout the day where, and I talk to my brothers about this, where I listen to the birds. I listen to the birds. I love to go to the zoo and look at the animals. I love nature. I love everything about nature because it's God. And I tell people oftentimes that if you want to know more about God, just go outside and watch. Look up in the sky. Look up in the sky at night.
Yeah.
Take some time to really get into what God created for each and every one of us. Take a breath.
Hey, the lilies of the field, right?
Come on, talk to me. But I bring all of that up because we've got to do the work. And this is where I believe many of us in the religious realm fail to communicate to others that you've got to do the work. Listen, God is not just going to come down, knock on your door, and say, put the third pork chop away with the hot sauce. God is not going to come down and cook some green vegetables for you. You got to find out what it is that I need to do in order to heal my body, heal myself from the racial trauma that I am experiencing. First of all, you got to identify the fact that it is. And that's why we need a Dr. Gigi Khanyezi. That's why we need you. That's why we need you.
Yeah. And, I appreciate the way you're talking about doing the work. And the reality is, a lot of our communities are not doing the work because the people that lead them don't even know what work they should be doing. So how can they teach you what, you know what I mean? So this is actually one of the reasons why I recently created a publication called Introduction to Healing Racial Trauma, an e-manual for followers of Brown Jesus. Now, just in case those of you that are listening are not followers of Jesus, there is still plenty in this publication that is super valuable to you. And if that's you, you can read it and just get a better sense of what the truth is about the Jesus of the Bible, even if you don't believe in him. Because
is that available online? I got your website going across. Great.
Yeah. If you go to my website, it's right on the front page, the homepage. But the thing is, the supposed Jesus has been hijacked into a white colonizer, patriarchal, jerk.
Be free to speak, sis. You're good.
Yeah. The Jesus that we've inherited in mainstream Christianity in the United States is, forgive my language, but he's kind of an asshole. And that Jesus is the colonizer. He's the one that endorsed enslaving of human bodies and a near genocide of indigenous peoples. That Jesus doesn't actually exist except in the minds and the traditions of what Frederick Douglass named the slaveholders' religion. There's a reason why mainstream American Christianity, Frederick Douglass called the slaveholders' religion. It's not the real Jesus. So I say that to say this is part of the reason why the e-manual, understanding that Jesus was brown and what his brownness meant for who he was, his lived experience, and how it changes when you understand his brownness. It changes how we understand what he taught and how he lived. Everything about his life was in resistance. First of all, it was advocating and giving voice to the peoples who were at the bottom of society's hierarchies. But even doing that wasn't enough. He advocated and he was a voice for, and he spent time with and healed. But then he challenged the systems that kept them on the bottom. That is who Jesus actually was. So that is where the e-manual starts. And there's a reason why, it's pun intended. E-manual, like the name for Jesus, Emmanuel, literally means God with us. And me naming that is saying, in our pervasive trauma, God is with us. And that God that is living in our spirit and in our body built us to be able to heal.
Hey, listen, y'all comment on this, man. We on Facebook Live, YouTube Live. We've got a couple minutes left, man. Can you imagine being in class with this conversation every week? Let me ask you this. Let me throw this out there. And the emails are already starting. Lord, you didn't talk about the Jesus. Oh,
Oh boy.
but they know me, so I can handle it. Yeah, that's it, Cornell. And doctors do not. My wife, who retired today from over 40 years of nursing.
Congratulations.
Last day, and she is officially retired. So we are one more person who is part of J. Fauntleroy and Associates. We have another member of our association who will be. We're gonna give her a break, and then after that, it's time to roll up the sleeves and get going. But let me throw this out here. This is important to deal with. Can a person of non-melanated skin, white person, Asian person, can they experience racial trauma also?
I'm so glad you asked me that question. Okay, there is something called perpetration-induced traumatic stress. Perpetration-induced traumatic stress. What that means is, and I'm going to speak of it specifically in terms of race. And what we've already established is talking about race means we have to talk about multiple generations. We can't just talk about life today, right? So when we talk about perpetration-induced traumatic stress, we're talking about what I call the dominating community. So that's the white-bodied siblings of ours. That's the dominating community. It has been generation after generation after generation after generation of perpetrating violence, whether that be physical, psychological, relational, spiritual, every kind of violence there is, sexual. They have been perpetrating violence and brutality for hundreds of years. We're talking about pastors pausing the church service to let the whole church, including himself and his family and his children, go be a part of a lynching. Pausing church service so we can all go and witness it like entertainment, like a picnic.
Wow.
And children are experiencing that. Children are growing up, which means they are desensitized over generations. They are desensitized. So what I suggest is that on one hand, the dominating community has profoundly dehumanized us, people of color. But what we don't often talk about is that they've dehumanized themselves. The only way a human can perpetrate those kinds of atrocities on other humans is if they have shut down a part of their soul, which is a part of their humanity.
You know, I never thought of it like that. You know what? Yes, I have, but not to the point that we're dealing with tonight. I've often seen those pictures, and I've seen those young people, and basically, some of those young people are amongst us now.
That's right.
And they have seen this. They have come up in a household that may have heard one way, but as they went through society, they met other people of color, and it didn't line up with what was being perpetrated in the household or what was being said. You know, I worked as a police officer for 25 years, and I had white partners who, to this day, I consider them some of my best friends. I've had black partners, and I've had bad on both sides. And I believe that it was important for me to have those conversations to get to know one another so that we can see that we're still human. I had their back just as well as they had my back. And thank God I lived in a community and had a family that taught me about, well, really didn't say anything about race. It was kind of understood, but we had people of all different ethnic backgrounds, all types of genders, and everything else in our homes. So my parents broke down ignorance. And I think that's what's missing. And it's sad that I see us going backwards, Dr. Khanyezi. We're going backwards instead of forwards because we are forwarding the level of ignorance instead of breaking it down. But it's up to people like yourself and myself and these continued conversations that we're having here. And that's why the space that you're in is so important. And I'm so thankful that you have chosen to put work in this particular area. As we wrap it up, what do we do? What do we do, Doc?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll give you a few really practical things. So number one, the two main things that I mentioned already. Number one, relationships. Make sure that you have at least a few relationships around you where you feel understood with no conditions, where you feel loved and embraced with no conditions. That is one of the most, if not the most, profoundly healing thing that we can do, and stay consistent in those relationships. Number two, we've got to reconnect with our bodies. We've got to reconnect with our bodies. I would recommend making some grounding exercises like breathing exercises a part of daily practices. Make it a part of your routine. And I mean, the most important time to do it consistently is when everything is good, because you're conditioning your body by breathing deeply when everything is good, so that when the stuff hits the fan, you know exactly where to turn to bring your cortisol back down and to bring your nervous system back down.
I know my brother Cornell is on here, and he talked about square breathing and explained the importance of that. So that's big. That's big.
Yeah. So let me just explain to people, when you said, they already explained square breathing here in this space.
Go ahead.
Okay. So there's different ways, there's different types of breathing exercises you can do. But when we talk about square breathing, or like some people call it 4x4 breathing, it usually means you breathe in slowly for 4 counts. So you breathe in 1, 2, 3, 4. You hold it for another 4 counts. You breathe out for 4 counts, and then you hold it for 4 counts.
So in through your nose and out through your mouth.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you do the whole thing 4 times. Mm-hmm. Another way that you can do a breathing exercise is to breathe in for 4 counts, hold it for 5 counts, breathe out for 6 counts, hold it for 7 counts, and do that at least 4 times. I mean, when I say it works like magic, I'm not a big proponent of magic, but I mean, you can feel it in your physical body. You feel different when you do it. So I suggest using something like that every single day. I would suggest morning, lunchtime, night, make it routine. And then whenever you find yourself in a stressful situation, use it again. And then Jeff, we're almost out of time. Let me give you one more exercise that you can do. And you can do this anywhere. You can be in the middle of a meeting and nobody will know. And it's called counting colors. When something is stressing you out and you can feel it in your body, you start with 5 and you go down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you can go any order of colors. So for instance, find 5 things in the room that are blue and name them.
Wow.
And then find 4 things in the room that are red, name them.
Wow.
Find 3 things in the room that are yellow. Find 2 things in the room that are purple. Find 1 thing in the room that's gold. And that shifts your body to the other side of your brain. And it shifts you out of stress response and back into, so when you have a trauma response, the trauma brain, which is back here, activates, and it literally cuts off the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is where logic and reasoning happen, right? So these are the kind of skills that I teach quite a bit. So number 1, relationships. Number 2, reconnect to your body. If you get the e-manual on my website, it's running across the screen, front page, that walks you through a step-by-step process of reconnecting with your body in ways that don't feel overwhelming. Okay. Number 3, I mentioned already, I have a community called Jesus and Justice. And the way you come into the community is by taking the Jesus and Justice course, which is 10-week live, totally virtual, 12 people or less, so that we keep it intimate and we keep it really safe. The next cohort starts in 3 weeks, 3 weeks from today, actually. So if you go, actually, you can either go on my website and click on Jesus and Justice, or you can just go to ggionline.org/Jesus and Justice course.
Look at this. They want you back already.
Oh, it would be my honor. It would be my honor. But this is...
We need your Cash App. What's your Cash App?
Oh, thank you. My Cash App is, let me make sure I have it right. I think it's Dr. Gigi -online. I have a Cash App and Venmo both, so sometimes I get them confused.
Cool.
Yeah, it's it's Dr. Gigi Online, no dash. Dr. Gigi Online.
Okay, we're going to put that on there. Listen, guys, I don't know about you, but I've been blessed. And while I put this out there, I want to talk about one more thing that I have incorporated. So every morning, what I do is I sit out back towards the sun, let that sun hit me, and I lean my head back and I roll my eyes to the back with my eyes closed, and I count down from 100. And I slowly count down from 100, and when I get to about 5, I start opening my eyes very slowly. And I have a mantra. You can create your own, but my mantra is: today is a great day, a great day. Great things are coming my way. And I say that for those last 5 seconds. And I tell you, I feel so good from that. It's a reset. It's a reset. And let me tell you something. It is very important for us to take on these things that have gone forward today. Listen, if you've been blessed tonight, there's Dr. Khanyezi's Cash App. You go ahead and you bless her, because let me tell you something. This was a blessing, Doc. I can't thank you enough. They already want you back. We got comments. This will be helpful. My doctors want me to stop anxiety med. Boy, this will be helpful. Look at this. I mean,
yes.
You know, folks are already. Dr. Khanyezi, I thank you. We're praying for you. We're praying for your sons. I know that it's been a rough time, to say the least. I know your story, and I'm so thankful for you. I'm glad of what God is doing through you for the people of God, for the people, period, of this nation. I know that we're going to be better. We're going to be better because of people like you. We're going to have you back on, but guys, I want you to go ahead and I want you to Cash App Dr. Gigi Online. Sow a seed into the work that this young lady is doing for this nation. We need racial healing. We need to have that conversation. And I don't care what color you are, as you heard, it doesn't matter. But we need that healing. We need to realize that trauma and get in touch with your body.
Yeah. Dr. Jeff, can I leave the people with one last thought?
Please.
This is my last thought. Siblings, you are sacred. You are made in the image of your Creator. Your value cannot be lost, it cannot be stolen, and it cannot be earned. It just is. No matter what you do or what you don't do, you are precious. You are sacred. You are irreplaceable. You make this space sacred. Bless you.
Ashe, Ashe, Ashe-o. God bless you, my sister. Listen, guys, you have been blessed by Dr. Gigi Khanyezi on the Dr. Jeff Experience. You know what I always tell you. Go out, meet needs, solve problems. Whatever you do, get in touch with your body. Get in touch with Dr. Gigi. Start your traumatic healing right now. God bless you, and we'll see you next Tuesday. Peace and love.
Deuces.